Not saying education is not important. I do strongly believe it is, but whatever route you decide to go in your life is not doesn't mean it's the wrong way. Because I always thought that about myself. I did things the wrong way. I didn't go to a four-year university, but honestly, now that I look back, I did things the right way. I didn't waste money. I learned what hard work was. I went for what I wanted to get to where I am today. So I think first you have to start with realizing what you really want out of life. Some people love the corporate space. It's more comfortable as long as you find growth within it, right? So you have to find that right company for you. Do they align with your values? If they don't, then you probably should walk away. Maybe that's why you're not happy, because that company's overworking you, you're overwhelmed, and that might be the reason why you're not happy. But I think sometimes it's the fear of not being successful, and that's why people just stay in these roles and they're literally miserable, but they're just not taking the opportunity to put themselves out there, go network, go meet other people, talk about other jobs, and kind of figure out what is it that you want out of life.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the HR Heroes podcast. I've got a very special guest with me here today. Melissa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here today.
Oh man, I'm really excited too, because I think we're going to be able to talk about kind of the changing landscape of HR, talent acquisition, and kind of how we position business in our lives. Before we kind of get into the conversation, I want to ask you, what are you most excited about in life right now?
I would say I'm really passionate about the change that's happening in the world. I feel like diversity, equity, and inclusion is a big priority now. And I just love to see change overall and how it's overcome in the last few years.
Nice. So what does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to you? Because one of the things that we talked about in our previous conversation was you're a first generation family member to graduate from college. You kind of set the standard, if you will. And I know that I come from a very diverse background as well. I looked at my ancestry.com and I'm from like 60 different countries, right? But I also know that sometimes being able to represent what change looks like can sometimes be challenging. That's a lot of responsibility. So what does kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion look like for you from your perspective?
Yeah, from my perspective, I would say that it has changed in a positive way now. But I remember when I finished college and I was a first generation college graduate, it's actually very challenging because I didn't have parents that went to college. So I can't rely on them or ask them, how do you get corporate success? How do I move up that ladder? So I really had to take the accountability myself to get to where I am in my career today. So I'm very proud of all my accomplishments that I have done over my career. But now I think you should use that to your advantage. Being diverse is actually a great thing because companies want that different perspective of thought, different perspective of ideas. So it's really important to showcase that. But again, always take accountability for your career. It's not just going to come to your lap. And especially for first generations, you do have to try a little bit harder, which is unfortunate. But like I said, there's so many programs nowadays that really help you set you up for success. Or there's always career coaches like myself. I love to give advice and mentor people just so that they could get to that stage in their career where they feel fulfilled, they're valued, they're getting paid accurately. So I really enjoy doing that.
Do you feel like your mentoring and coaching is the ability for you to kind of like reach back and pull people forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And it comes from my passion just because of what I went through and how I always thought since I didn't go to a top tier university, I'm probably not going to get to the level that I am today. I'm a director of talent acquisition at a pretty big organization. So I do bring a lot of value and I could be a change driver as well, meaning that I could bring in that diverse talent. I could change the perspective of leaders that might be a little bit against it or maybe uncomfortable with the conversation. So I do want to be that role model for other young Latinas that don't have that person that they could go to for advice, and just know that anything you set your mind to, you could definitely do it.
I love that. Let's talk a little bit about your journey, because I know when we're growing up, often in fifth grade, we're like, I want to be a superhero or an astronaut. We don't say I want to be like a HR leader in talent acquisition. So let's talk about kind of like your early college days and finding your path in the space.
Yeah, so for me, it's actually interesting because I started my journey in the banking industry. So I started off as a teller, and that was like after high school. So my parents were more so like, "Hey, if you want to like go to college, you have to work for it. We will help you a bit, but you do have to work for it." Which I'm really happy that they did that because it showed me the value of hard work, and getting to where you need to get to in life comes from yourself and not just relying on your parents. Even though my parents are great, they taught me a lot and they did support me in all my dreams. So when I started in the banking industry, I was still kind of unsure. I was in community college trying to figure out, do I really love the banking industry? Do I want to go into finance? Or where do I really see myself? So that's when I started to draw an interest in HR and recruiting, just because I was in sales at the moment and I did really, really well in sales. So I really thought that sales and recruiting is the same thing. You're trying to sell an opportunity, right? You're trying to give that person their next career opportunity. So I thought it really aligned well, and I knew it was going to be really hard to make that adjustment from banking to HR. Everybody wants to be in HR. I always hear it. How do I get into HR? And unfortunately, you do have to start from the lowest level sometimes. So coordinator and get yourself up there because you do need experience at the end of the day to really pursue an HR career. So for me, I really started to go to a lot of networking events just to put myself out there because I knew it was gonna be a challenge. And I had even tried to get an internship with the bank that I was working at, and they declined me. And I later figured out that they had hired some executive kids, and those kids always have it easier because you have
Mm,
executive parents that could help you get there. I didn't have that, so I just decided, you know what, I'm not gonna let that discourage me. So I did a ton of networking events, and I ended up meeting this consultant that worked for Farmers Insurance at the time, and he was a huge advocate for me. I kind of told him my struggles, like it's going to be hard to get into recruiting, and he's like, "No, sales and recruiting is literally the same thing." So he actually had an opening at his agency. So I ended up getting that job, and it was really recruiting agency ownership. So it was definitely still sales. I was doing a ton of cold calling, and then I decided to pursue more so corporate recruiting. So again, did a ton of networking, got out of my comfort zone. I found this company, Echo Global Logistics. So when I found that job, they were looking for a sales recruiter. And I thought that was like the perfect job for me. I love sales, I love recruiting, and it would give me a different perspective to be in the corporate space of recruiting versus the agency side. So I did end up applying, and I messaged the head of recruiting at that time, and she actually didn't respond, which I figured she wouldn't. She was probably too busy, but I didn't let that discourage me. And they actually ended up posting an open house that they had just to come in, check out the office space. It was a really cool company. So I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna go in, introduce myself. What do I have to lose? Maybe they filled the role, maybe they didn't.
pause for a second.
Yeah.
So what you've done a couple things here, which I think is really, really cool. So first of all, you're taking all of your opportunity creation into your own hands. You're not waiting for a handout, but you're
Right.
going and pursuing this stuff. You're showing up at these different locations. You see an open house and you're like, dude, I'm just gonna show up and like see what happens. That is so cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it definitely made the difference. So that's why I wanted to tell the story because I actually ended up introducing myself to her, and she actually remembered me. She's like, "Oh, you messaged me." I was like, "Yeah, you didn't respond, but I understand you're probably so busy, but I wanted to introduce myself. I'm really interested in this company." And at that moment, I was still in school pursuing my HR degree, so I didn't technically have it. So I was kind of scared, like, "Oh, they're probably not going to consider me because I
Were
don't
you like
have."
nervous when you were like walking up to the open
Yes.
house? What was that like?
Oh man, I consider myself more an introvert. So anytime that I have
This does
done,
not sound like introvert activity. You know what I mean?
I know I really had to step outside of my comfort zone. So I was really nervous, but I just kept on telling myself, "What do I have to lose?" I just introduced myself. They might have filled the role, but maybe they'll consider me for the future because I took the initiative.
Yeah.
So that's what made me end up doing it. I didn't want to get out of the car when I got there. I'm like, should I just leave? But I convinced myself, just do it. You have nothing to lose. And then so I ended up meeting her, and she remembered me. And then she ended up introducing me to the hiring manager at that time. So she actually 2 days later, she called me for an interview, and I ended up getting the job.
Wow.
Yeah, which I knew for a fact if I didn't do that, I would have not gotten that job.
I mean, were you always like this? Like even as a kid? Because one thing I really appreciate about like go-getters is like we make opportunities happen for ourselves. Like there's a fallacy in the world today where people think that they can just sit back and then the world's going to be all right and then it's going to give us an opportunity, but the chances come to the people who go out and get it. So have you always been like this, an introvert kid, but also coming out of your shell and like chasing stuff your entire life? Or what was that like?
Yeah, I would definitely say that even as a kid, I was an introvert always, but I always wanted to make a lot of money and work hard for what I would get to in life. But I also think it was my parents just showing me that hard work is going to get you to where you need. And I think sometimes that's why diversity comes in hand because they taught me the value of hard work, right?
Mm.
If they would have just paid for my college here, go off to college for 4 years and party in school, have fun, and then hopefully you figure it out. They didn't allow that really to happen. That wasn't an option for me. It was more so, hey, if you want that, you're going to have to pursue it. You're going to have to work for it. You're going to have to figure it out. So even though working full time and going to school remotely full time was a big challenge, the weekends, I would have no weekends. It would be homework for me.
Mm.
So I really didn't have a life, but it ended up working out for me. So I have no regrets.
Dude, I mean, it's so cool to hear that because there's just so many opportunities in life that I feel like people kind of let slide past them. And when you come from a privileged household, as an example, I feel like I see Gary Vaynerchuk talk about this a lot, Gary V on social media. He's like, the people who come from heavy amounts of money, you guys are so screwed in life because you don't know what it's like to actually work for anything. And you're going to become 35 years old one day and then be like, I haven't accomplished anything on my own, but everybody else who's been grinding from the very beginning is so far ahead of you just in the process of pursuing life and understanding what it takes to get stuff done. And I feel like I just want to say, like, hat off to you because you've made so much cool stuff happen for yourself. That's just like so awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So what were your mom and dad like? So when you were growing up, what example were they setting for you? Because obviously it seems like they've done an amazing job in raising you and kind of creating the mindset of like what you needed to do to go get your stuff.
Yeah, so they were definitely really hardworking. My mom was more so a stay-at-home mom, but she did have kind of a job at one point, but really her priority was to be a stay-at-home mom. While my dad, he was a pipe fitter, and he really was a hard worker, like always working overtime. Like I said, he never worked in a corporate, but he works for a union, and he got a lot of financial success on his own, also not having a role model, but he learned how to really invest his money. And he taught us young that the importance of your credit. So I had a credit card when I was probably, I think, 16 with my dad. So he wanted to start to build my credit up. So even though he came from like a family that they didn't
Yeah.
grow up with that, but he learned it on his own. So I think my dad is my biggest motivator when it comes to like how I always went for things that I wanted to do and not wait around and not have a role model. Like I just did what I needed to do to get through. So he taught me that like at the end of the day, you're going to be successful if you put your mind to it.
What message would you give to the younger generation of people who want to accomplish big things, but they feel like they're stuck and they can't get started? You know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like there's a lot of people out there who kind of find themselves in jobs and find themselves in situations where they're like, well, I mean, I have the security of my job and I really am passionate about doing X, Y, and Z, but I don't really know how to get started. What would you kind of tell those people?
Yeah, my advice is just take accountability for what you want to do in life, right? And figure out what your true happiness is. Maybe you're not meant to work at a corporation. Maybe you're meant to start your own business and be an entrepreneur. So I think first you have to start with realizing what you really want out of life. Some people love the corporate space. It's more comfortable as long as you find growth within it, right? So you have to find that right company for you. Do they align with your values? If they don't, then you probably should walk away. Maybe that's why you're not happy because that company's overworking you, you're overwhelmed, and that might be the reason why you're not happy. But I think sometimes it's the fear of not being successful, and that's why people just stay in these roles and they're literally miserable, but they're just not taking the opportunity to put themselves out there, go network, go meet other people, talk about other jobs, and kind of figure out what is it that you want out of life. And just remember, like, to get success, you do face challenges, and it's never going to be easy. If it was easy, everybody would be an entrepreneur and a billionaire at this point, but it's not easy. So
What do you think about that word accountability? You've used that a couple times today. I'm a huge advocate for accountability because I feel like a lot of people are willing to often point the finger at somebody else, but they ignore the three fingers that are pointed back at them. So what does accountability mean to you?
yeah, for me, accountability just means taking control of what you want and not blaming, like you said, others or, hey, they didn't do that, or blaming your parents. Well, they didn't send me off to college, so it's their fault. No, it's not their fault because you still could have gotten the work experience. And nowadays, work experience means more sometimes than a college education, right? Not saying education is not important. I
Mhm.
do strongly believe it is, but whatever route you decide to go in your life doesn't mean it's the wrong way. Because I always thought that about myself. I did things the wrong way. I didn't go to a four-year university. But honestly, now that I look back, I did things the right way. I didn't waste money. I learned what hard work was. I went for what I wanted to get to where I am today. So if I did it, anyone could do it. But I also didn't sit at home and just hope that a recruiter was going to look at my resume like, she's amazing, I'm going to hire her. That's just not how it works. You're competing with a lot of people. So if you set yourself up for success and you take that accountability, go to that event, introduce yourself, again, what do you have to lose? They're just going to say no, or hey, they might consider you for the next role that they have. Like, I love that person. They took accountability. I just hired a technical recruiter. He literally hit me up on LinkedIn and he was like, I see that you have a temp opening. I'm super interested. I was like, you know what? Let's get on a call. And I ended up hiring him full time. He proved himself, but he
Nice.
took the initiative. I had 300 plus applicants at that moment. And guess what? He was one that applied, but he was one that reached out on LinkedIn to get that connection
How many
going.
other people reached out?
Actually, no one else.
Wow.
Yeah.
So like let's talk about
Yeah.
that. Do you know what I mean? It's like sometimes just raising your hand and being able to take the extra step is something that's so cool. I was listening to a podcast the other day. No, I'm sorry. I was listening to a podcast with the founder of Twilio. Have you heard of Twilio? So
Yes.
Twilio is the text message like gateway that sends text for like Uber and all these different companies and stuff like that. And this guy was talking about the fact of how he got Twilio off the ground was him and his brother applied for scholarships to get started. And he was like, one thing that I found out was like nobody really applies for scholarships. So like if you're willing to actually do the work, you're already setting yourself apart from everybody else, and the odds are you're going to be rewarded. A perfect example of your new technical recruiter is somebody who raised their hand, put their hat in the bucket, and then also said, I'm going to reach out personally. And look what happened. They got the opportunity. That's so sick. Did you put a lot of emphasis on your grades when you were coming up through school? I know how you said education's important, but how was your kind of mindset when it came to like performing well in school and getting straight A's? Were you a good student?
I was definitely a good student.
Mm.
I feel like I've always been a go-getter, but I've always thought that I would have to work harder than anybody else would. So I thought grades would have to be really important. Even going to school full time and working full time, I still got a 4.0 GPA when I
Wow.
graduated. So
Congratulations.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Even though it was really tough work, but to me, I just knew I had to stand out a bit more because sometimes, again, it's hard when you're coming up diverse and you don't have role models. You start to think a little negative that you won't get to where you want because other people have opportunities. They have the right connection. They have the parent executives that could get them there. But again, now that I'm older, more mature, and have experienced career growth, anybody could do it. And I that's why I want to be an advocate for younger people that don't see themselves like that. Like it is possible if you take that accountability and you take that initiative, just like that recruiter did. He reached out to me. If he didn't reach out to me, I probably would have not looked at his resume. Let's be honest. I was looking at 300 resumes and I might have reviewed the first 10 and maybe one of the first 10 would have got lucky. But if you don't think that way, you're never going to get anywhere in life.
Man, something that's really cool that I was wanted to bring up in our previous conversation was you put a lot of emphasis on being a good example for your cousins. Let's kind of talk about inspiring the next generation kind of in your family and what that means to you.
Yeah, so I definitely want to be that role model for them as well. And you show them, and they're always like, "You're so successful. How did you do it?" And I love to like tell the stories. Well, I put myself out there, and I'm introverted. I didn't want to go networking. That was the last thing I wanted to do. But once you step outside of your comfort zone, that's when you start to get more comfortable. So that's always
Yes.
true.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's one of the things that I think is really important to kind of recognize is in our previous conversation, you talked about less than 1% of C-suite executives are Latina and Latino. So what does that mean to you? And what kind of opportunities do you want to kind of use to change that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to hear that number because it's super low, right? And it makes you think like, well, how can your company change that when there's not a lot of C level sweet people to go after that are Hispanic Latino? But that's when you start to think about your successors. How can you bring in successors that are Hispanic Latino or African American, right? Their numbers are really low too. And even women make up like 12% of the Fortune 500 CEOs. So even women don't make up a lot in that level, but how do we make the change? So for me, I've always been a huge advocate of working for companies that believe in bringing in successors that are diverse and growing the talent from within and not always thinking of going externally. Because if you go externally, you're going to find white male because
Yeah.
they make up the population. If you want that experience, that's what you're going to find in the market. But if you grow your internal talent, that's when you're going to start to make that impact in your organization.
I mean, there's so many opportunities to grow from within. And I always think about that. And I hear a lot of different talent acquisition leaders who talk about the strategic nature of being able to build from within is a long term retention play. That means if I give you the resources, the tools that you need to become the best version of yourself, you're going to grow within the organization. But it's a lot of succession planning as well. And I feel like it's very easy to look outside the four walls of the organization rather than investing into your own team. So here's a question for you. This came from another podcast guest, and she wanted to know in a previous episodes. This isn't your question,
Yeah.
but she was asking why is it so easy for organizations to look outward for talent instead of investing into their internal talent? So skill development, personal development. Why do you feel like it's so easy just to look outside rather than taking your team and upskilling them?
Yeah, I would say people tend to look outside because they don't want to focus on the training part, right? It's
Mm,
always easier to find somebody that knows how to do the job versus training somebody that's not ready. So it's honestly the lazy way sometimes, but sometimes it's also the strategic way. Maybe your organization is missing something currently, or they're not future thinking, so they want somebody that is future thinking, so they have to bring in somebody externally. So
Mhm.
it's not always a bad thing to bring in external talent, but I think it's also important to develop your internal talent. You have programs to help develop those leaders that want to get into that level in their career, right? Or what about people that are entry level that want to get into a management role that have no prior management experience? How are you going to grow and develop them? Because it's going to be harder for them to get opportunities if you're not willing to invest in them.
Yeah, no, it's definitely true. What do you kind of think about, I would say, the changing landscape of work? So ever since the pandemic, I talk about this new generation of workers equates to people who are not living to work, but are working to live. And especially when we think about kind of millennials and Gen Z and Alpha, who's going to be coming into the space here pretty soon, we have completely different expectations for what work looks like. So, from a talent acquisition perspective, how do you balance that new wave of expectation compared to kind of where we came from and the needs from like a financial institution?
Yeah, so that's definitely challenging, especially with Gen Z. They're the type that tend to leave companies very fast if something is not met for them. So, for example, let's say they feel like your company doesn't offer a good work life balance plan. They're probably the first to leave and not even give you a notice. And my advice to Gen Z, give 2 week notices. You never want to burn a bridge because it will come back to you. I promise you it will.
Yeah.
You just never know who you're connecting with, or you apply to another organization. That manager might move to that organization and they're going to remember that you didn't think that you had to give a 2 week notice because you didn't care. And I know TikTok is a big advocate for that now. People are like, no, mental health is really important. You don't have to give a 2 week notice. I'm really against that. And I do, mental health is a priority for everyone, but also just never burn a bridge. It's not smart.
But is mental health kind of a use case in that situation of just being like, I'm out, peace, without saying anything? Do you know what I mean? That seems like that's almost being used as kind of like a vehicle to justify it. But instead of like going back to the lens of like accountability, like we talked about, you have an accountability to the organization that you signed up for. So you should at least give them 2 weeks to be able to kind of fill your spot and even explore, hey, if you're not happy here, how can we make you happy? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the problem with that generation is that they will give up really quick and they won't even work with their manager, they won't work with HR. So you really didn't even try to fix the problem. And then yeah, you'll go on social media and bash the company and say, "Well, my mental health is more important, so I left. They didn't care about me." But what did you do? Did you try to talk to someone or did you just give up right away? I would just say don't give up right away because you just don't want that to look bad on your resume and you never want to burn those bridges because it's really important. Your relationships will end up making your career, and I'm an advocate for that because I've been in situations where my current company, I'm there because I used to work with the chief at a different company, and literally when she saw that I left that company, she pinged me on LinkedIn right away. If you're ever happy with your new company, just let me know. I would
Wow.
hire you immediately. So when I was unhappy with that last company, then I ended up reaching out to her and she hired me immediately. So it is about your network sometimes and keeping those positive relationships, good work ethic, and never burning that bridge.
What do you think about building networks, especially in this digital world? So, you and I connected via LinkedIn, which I feel like is a super underutilized platform for so many people here today. What's kind of your 2 cents on like the digital networking space and like how do you do it well?
Yeah, for me, I would say there's so many opportunities on LinkedIn, and I think it's just connecting with people, being a mentor, or asking people to mentor you. That's definitely something that's really rewarding. If somebody reaches out to you, like, "Hey, I would love for you to mentor me," and again, what's the worst that they could say no? Or, "Hey, I'm really interested in your company. Can we grab coffee and chat?" And I know now after COVID, everything is really remote, but if you do have the opportunity to be in person and get a coffee and chat with somebody, I would recommend it because you're building that personal connection, but also use LinkedIn to your advantage. If you're looking for a job and you see the recruiter posted, why don't you message the recruiter and just introduce yourself? As long as you're humble and not saying, "Hey, please hire me. I deserve the role." No, just ask them about them. Tell me about the company. I would love to learn more. Can I get 5 minutes of your time? People will appreciate that. And again, sometimes they are busy. So don't be discouraged if one person doesn't respond, the next person might respond. So I think just being an advocate for yourself on LinkedIn, looking at different groups that you could join, whatever you're passionate about. There's a whole bunch of diversity groups that I'm in for Hispanics, like Hispanic Pro Networking, or for example, ASE is another big one, and I did their leadership program. But I got to network with so many women that are in high level roles as well, and got to talk about our challenges, and we still talk to this day. So that's how you start building your network when you start to put yourself again get yourself on uncomfortable situations and just talk to people. People love to help and people are passionate maybe about what you're passionate with, and just align on those goals and just continue to advocate for yourself, I would say.
I mean, let's talk about let's get tactical here. So, if somebody wanted to, they saw you as a talent acquisition leader and they were trying to become part of an organization that you represented, what would be your first tip for them and how they could start engaging with you? Is it commenting on your posts? Is it sending you a DM? Is it sending you a personalized video? Is there like a strategy that you've seen that was like, dude, that was really creative?
Yeah, so I would say definitely engaging with them first, kind of looking at what that person posts, what are they into. That way you could have a message that's personalized to them versus saying, "Hey, I saw this job, I'm really interested, can we chat?" That's just so generalized that it's not going to draw my attention and I'm very busy as it is.
Hmm.
So I get tons of those messages, right? So you're not really standing out. But if you come a little bit more genuine like, "Hey, I saw that you were part of the Mujeres de Hace leadership program. I'm really interested. I'm first generation as well. Do you have time to talk?" I would definitely get on the phone with that person immediately. Just because they actually took their time to research me first and personalize their message instead of just being like insincere and just wanting something out of you. Because on LinkedIn, especially when you're in those type of leadership roles, you get pinged by staffing agencies
All the time.
all the time. I get
Yeah.
calls 24/7 and they're just not genuine with their approach. They're just trying to get the sales. And that to me is a way you will never have a relationship with me because you're not genuine.
Yeah. What's one of like your red flags that goes up as soon as you see a message? Because as soon as I see some of these messages that I get on LinkedIn, I'm like, absolutely not. Just like ignore, delete, keep moving.
When they're too long right
Yeah.
away, because they're trying to sell you something. I know you're not being sincere. You're trying to sell me something. There's a way around that, or just maybe asking for your need and stuff instead of just pitching right away. And that's where people make that mistake. They just pitch the whole thing in a big message. I'm not gonna read that message. Let's be real. I'm not. I know you're trying to sell me something.
Yeah.
So
Man, it's just crazy to think about how it's one of my best friends, Dante McLean, who's a partner in my business as well. He says marketers ruin everything because as soon as we realize a channel like DMs on LinkedIn is like an availability, we try and smash it home. And every single time I receive one of those long messages, I'm like, okay, no. And I just like keep moving. You know what I mean? One of the topics I want to talk about, which I think we can kind of riff on for a minute, is personal development. So, recognizing that we came from families where a lot of people didn't set the example from us. So, we at one point in time had to look internally to kind of figure out how we were going to navigate. When did you kind of discover like personal development and why is it so important to you?
for me, personal development probably happened when I graduated from high school and thinking about what the next step was for me and thinking how am I going to get to that next step. And again, I use my network when I was like the bank would probably be a great job for me just to start off and get some exposure. And I was working in retail before, so I kind of thought it was aligned pretty well. So I used my network, I applied, and I believe my cousin's friend referred me to the bank, and that's how I got in basically. And a referral matters too. So I
Oh, yeah.
started just thinking about more personal development. What can I do to develop my brand? And that's my biggest advice is develop your own brand, right? Because these companies come and go, but your brand is going to stay with you forever, right? So what is your brand going to mean to other people that you're trying to mentor
What
or
is your brand?
for me, I would say it's really taking accountability and stepping outside of your comfort zone. I'm a big advocate for that because I feel like when you do things that make you uncomfortable, that's how you end up growing, right? I'm not a huge fan of presenting, but I've done it more often just to be more comfortable with it because if I never do it, I'm gonna be more nervous every single time. So that would be my brand is just motivating people to like take that accountability because it will make a difference. And the story of how I got to Echo Global Logistics, I literally did not want to get out of the car. And I always think of that story because it was nerve wracking for me. And I finally did it. And guess what? I got the job because I put myself out there and I just stopped being negative. Hey, if I don't get the job, it's not the end of the world. Let me just put myself out there and hopefully it creates another opportunity for my future.
What do you think about the idea of being an optimist? So I am huge on positivity, but I've also gotten a lot of backlash in my life from people being like, Keenan, you are toxically positive because every single thing is always positive. So I've been messing around with a framework that I've been thinking about recently. It's practical optimism. So practically looking at every scenario and then choosing how I decide to look at this scenario with a optimistic attitude. So customer says they don't want to move forward with us. Okay, that sucks. But what can we learn from this situation and try and taking the kind of like silver lining out of the situation? So what do you kind of think about being an optimist in life? And what do you think about that framework too?
Well, I do think it's important to be optimistic in anything you do in life. I actually like that positive because people nowadays, you're so quick to be negative if something doesn't go your way. And again, it's like the social media trend that's encouraging that, where you something bad happens and you go on social media to talk about the negative experience, and you never talk about what you learned from it or what positive could come out of it, right? So I just think that it's important to always be positive in any situation because you're going to learn from every situation, right? At the end of the day, even though it might have not went your way, but maybe you didn't gain that customer, but maybe they'll think about you next time. Hey, maybe this is not a product for us, but they're talking to another colleague from another company or somebody they used to work with. Hey, I talked to this person and they have this product. I think would be great for your company, and you might get a sale that way. You just never know with your network. So I think it is really important to always see something positive in everything that may happen in life, even though there could be a lot of negatives, but being negative is probably not going to get you anywhere.
Yeah, I don't think it really will. And I feel like, misery loves company as well. And so when I see people just going into these echo chambers of negativity and complaining all the time, I'm like, yeah, guys, it's easy to stay there. You know what I mean? It's a
Mhm.
tough thing to do is to be positive and look at your situation with optimism and be like, all right, I'm going to get out of this because right now sucks and it's not going to be easy. But the work itself works on us more than we work on it. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, so what do you think about failure? Because I know that your journey has not always been easy from the outside looking in, so I'm sure that you failed along the way. So what do you kind of do when you come across failure and how do you position it?
Yeah. So again, I always think about what was a positive outcome. So I'll give an example, right? I did an interview with LinkedIn once. I was super, super excited. I love their values and they're really big on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So when I got to interview with them, I made it to like the final stages and I even got to meet with ERGs. So these ERGs were part of the Hispanics at LinkedIn. So when I got to meet with them, I even got even more interested in the company. So I really wanted that job super bad. I was like, I need that job. I love their value and everything that's happening. But I didn't end up getting it, and that's okay. That was a failure for me. But then that's when I ended up moving forward with Inspire, my current company, and I'm so happy. They're really big on work life balance. They're really big on culture. They're really big on bringing that value of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how we're going to grow the organization and bring that different perspective of thought. But what I would say now is looking back, I know some people that work at LinkedIn that were laid off, right? So I was thinking, what about if I got that job and I was laid off today? How would I feel? So to me, that's why it's so important to think of failure as sometimes as a win, and things do happen for a reason. And I think there was a reason why I ended up at the company that I am today versus being at LinkedIn, because I might have been one of the people that got laid off. So I look at it in a positive way, even though I think they're an excellent company. But these huge companies also had a lot of layoffs, and my company's more mid-size. And like I said, I really appreciate the work-life balance that they provide and the culture. I love the culture, and I'm super happy. And again, I have no regrets for where I'm at today.
Do you love what you do?
I do. I'm super passionate about just helping people just get to that next step in their career. If I could mentor them and if I could create a change in their life, positive change, and bringing them in a company where people where we do value work-life balance, because sometimes you hear stories of I work like 80 plus hours a week, I can't be with my kids, and then we could tell them, well, we value work-life balance. Like maybe that company pays you more, but you'll have more peace of mind here. What do you prefer to go with, right? So when you make those positive changes, it really impacts your career. And for me, just giving advice too, when I was in the ASEA woman leadership program for ASE, there was a one of the girls that was in the program as well. She was getting underpaid. I think it was like around 50K annually, and it was like a
Really?
yeah, it was like a male colleague that she was competing with, and she was very devastated. But I kind of coached her on how you could show you the value that you bring and bring up this conversation. I know it's uncomfortable, but you could say you did market research. I know this person is white male earning 50K more than me in the same position. That's a big equity
Whoa.
problem. So instead, she actually gained that value and experience, and she ended up applying for another job. She got it, and she got a 50K increase.
Wow.
So that's what makes me love my job and be passionate about just giving advice that could change somebody's life at the end of the day.
So how do you kind of approach work-life balance? Because when you're passionate about what you do, sometimes I feel like it's easy to kind of lose sight of that buzzword that's been so popular over the last couple of years.
Yeah, for me, it is really important to not bring work home. And especially for me, I work remotely, right? So sometimes it is hard to step away. So
Yeah.
what I like to do is once it's time to log off, I sign off and I go to the gym. So that way, to me, it's a stress reliever. I'm at the gym, I'm at a class doing something. And then that way I don't log back in later because now I'm pretty tired to get to work again. But also just remembering everybody has a life and you have to make time for your life and what you want to. And then on weekends, that's when if I could coach somebody or if they want interview training or a resume review, I'll definitely do it over the weekend because I have free time over the weekends. I have weekends off. But it's just how do I prioritize my time?
Yeah, I've been working on the theory, if you will, or the framework of work life integration. Because as you can tell, we are here in the studio, which is also in my house, which means I can work 10, 20, 30 hours a day, sometimes what it feels like. And I feel like that work life balance element, it looks different for all of us. And I actually saw a really cool post on LinkedIn the other day from a CEO, and he was emailing one of his team members. And at the very bottom of the email signature, it said, like, disclaimer, this email might be coming to you after hours, but this is when I have the most time to be able to send emails. This might not be your best time, but this is when I have time. And I thought that was a really cool little disclaimer to kind of talk about everybody does stuff in different times. And sometimes, especially in this new remote world of work, we have to work on the integration process of life and work together. And I feel like it looks completely different for everybody because if you have children, you need to take them to school. Sometimes you have to get them to practice. And I don't feel like our employers should be penalizing us for doing that stuff because that work life balance looks different for everybody.
Yeah, and I agree. I think I saw that post. I think I saw that you reposted it. So I was like, I love that because it is important. Some people just don't know when to stop answering emails, or if they feel like it's coming from a higher up, they have to respond immediately. But no, it's like respond at your own hours. Maybe that's the time that they had to respond because they have kids and they couldn't get to it. But doesn't mean you have to respond at 8 o'clock at night when your shift was done at 4 or 5, right? But to me, I think it's really important for leaders as well. Myself as a leader, I really pride myself on work life balance for my team. Some of them have kids, and sometimes like, oh, I have to take my daughter to a doctor appointment, and I always say you don't have to put PTO for 2 hours that you're going to
Yeah.
go take your kid. So I'm very laid back when it comes to that, and I know they appreciate that because at the end of the day, you have a life, you have a family, and I don't want work to overwhelm anyone. So I just always have these conversations with them, or if I do see that they email me after hours, I will ask them the next day, like, what time were you working till? Oh, well, I got caught up. I was working till 6. I said, why? Why do you have to work till 6? We don't work in the ER. Nothing's an emergency here. You could
Mm,
answer the next day. So for me, it's more just positive reinforcement with my own team as a leader. And I think more leaders could do that if you get them comfortable with things like that, or if you notice like they're up at 8 o'clock responding to an email, maybe ask them why. Why what was the rush behind that? And I mean, it's different if you work in the ER, right? You don't
yeah.
you don't have a break. So that's always the analogy I use. We don't work in the ER. We're in recruiting. They could wait a day for a response. So don't overwhelm yourself with responding at 8 o'clock at night. I don't believe in that,
Yeah.
and I think it's for mental health is it's really important as well, just to have that break and be able to step away. Or if you're having personal issues, sometimes that happens, right? You could have a death in your family. You might not be yourself. I always tell people, you know what, just take the day off. I know you're going through it today. It's okay. Restart tomorrow. Or if you feel like you need some time off, just let me know, and that's totally fine. But just encouraging them to understand, like everybody has issues sometimes, and sometimes you do need time for yourself, and it's okay.
There's a this is the question that came from our previous guest. Her name was Adrena Walker. And she said, in the space of HR and being a leader, we often spend a lot of time serving others. So how do you focus on being able to recharge your own cup? I know you mentioned the gym, but what other ways are you intentional about making sure that you show up as your best self every day?
Yeah, for me, I would say I like to do meditation too. And my company actually offers the Calm app. So we could actually get a subscription for free. But it's really nice because they even have some meditations around work or take a break during work. So for me, meditating helps like restart yourself. Or even if I'm having a day where I'm having personal issues and maybe I'm not my best self, just remembering that somebody else might not know what you're going through. So just remember to be the same person to them and show empathy. And obviously you want empathy received to yourself too. But just remembering that everybody does have life gets in the way sometimes, and just take that break or step away if it's getting a little bit too much for you. But that's how I restart myself. I love working out, and I also love using the Calm app just to like meditate when I need to, if I need to calm my mind a bit. But just remembering, like, don't take your frustration out on anybody. They don't deserve that, and you wouldn't want that in return.
How long have you been meditating?
That's actually new. Maybe now for a year.
Okay. What was your
Yeah.
process like when you first got started?
I at first it was hard for me to mentally get there, and then as I started to do it more, I just understood that just breathing sometimes and focus on your breathing makes a big difference. So just remembering that mental health is really important and like what ways, and my therapist kind of helped me with that too. She's like, one way for anxiety, if you have high anxiety, why don't you try meditation? And that's what made me get into meditation. And I just took advantage that my company had this app that helps us with that. So now I love the app. I use it every day, but it does make a big difference.
Yeah, when I first started, I think I started back 2014. One of my friends introduced me to Headspace, and he was like, "Dude, you should check out this meditation thing. Check out this app. It leads you through it." And one of the really cool things about the Headspace app that I really love is they have these little animated characters and like little scenes that they play out, and they use the example of kind of your thoughts being clouds. And often we think that like the clouds are just going to be here all the time, but clouds often move on. And the same thing happens with our thoughts. And so whenever I get into my streaks of meditating, I need to pick it back up, obviously. Um, I sit down and I try and calm myself. And it's crazy to think about all the things that brew up inside of me. And I have to kind of like really focus on my breath or just being present or listening to the sounds around me. And it's really transformative. And it's like a really cool practice that I feel like if I continue to do it, there are so many benefits because it helps me be more present instead of being caught up in like the whirlwind of all my thoughts.
Yeah, I love that. I haven't heard of that app, so I'll definitely check it out.
Yeah, Headspace,
Yeah.
huge. You should
Yeah.
check it out. I just love it because they've got these animations and they tell these really cool stories, like with these little characters who are like in a forest and then like a tree falls. And it's like, you know what I mean? Like
Oh.
sometimes we have thoughts that go throom and like, you know what I mean? It's just
Which
like,
is true.
yeah, it's just like, it really is really interesting to me. I want to use the last couple minutes here for us to kind of think about what does the future of talent acquisition look like from your perspective? What type of things are we looking at? Are you thinking about AI at all in talent acquisition? Like, what's your 2 cents on that before we actually go on that topic?
Yeah, so I love AI, to be honest, and the things that is coming with it, especially when it comes to applicant tracking systems or just having AI to assist you with, let's say, a background check, just double checking your work. So AI is going to be used a lot for, I would say, recruiting technology like applicant tracking systems, or how we look at resumes, pulling keywords. The AI could actually pull that for you. So
Yeah.
the technology is really awesome. And I would even say, even nowadays for candidates, right, or people that are looking for a job, you could literally use ChatGPT to create a resume if you want. But I always recommend personalize it. Like, use it if you're
Yeah.
not creative to get a template going, but also you always want to personalize. But there's so much cool things that ChatGPT could do, or even if you're trying to prep for a job, you could throw in that job description and it could help with questions or keywords. So use it to your advantage. I think technology is awesome, and it's going to continue to evolve the TA space in one way or another, if that's, using our applicant tracking systems, or even how we look at bringing in new talent to the team, right? So I just think there's a lot of good things that come with AI, but I don't think it's ever going to take away the human touch. And recruiting is something where you do want to talk to a real person, right? You want to hear the real voice behind them, and what do you think about the company? What's the culture like? You could, as much as people interview you, you have to interview them too. That's always my advice to people too. When you're interviewing, that's when you should really ask the questions that are important. If work life balance to you is a priority, then you should be asking those questions to everybody you interview. You should also ask about culture. If DE&I is important to you, ask those specific questions just to make sure that that company is also right for you. And that way you don't waste your time, and then you're there for 6 months and you decide you want to leave, and then it looks bad on your resume. So before you do that, do your research and ask some important questions. As much as they're interviewing you, interview them.
Yeah, I mean, because it is a two-way street. And at the end of the day, you do have optionality out here, and you have so many opportunities to go work for organizations that are all great. And you really do need to kind of prioritize finding the right fit for you. And I hope that people really kind of take that word of advice out of today's podcast is you do have to create that two-way street for that interview. Do you take pride in being kind of the tip of the spear, if you will? From being a talent acquisition leader, you are the first experience of your brand. And so do you take a lot of pride in kind of representing what your entire team's about?
Absolutely. And we always get tons of great feedback, especially from my recruiters. They're the ones that are talking to the candidates daily. And when I get paying, like, the recruiters really who sold me on the job, that's the feedback we want to hear, because they're really passionate about their jobs. And as a leader, that just makes me very happy, because that means I'm doing something right. If somebody likes the leader that they're working for, they're gonna do everything to work harder for you, because they never want to make you look bad.
Hmm.
So to me, it's definitely something that's why I'm really passionate about being a leader too, is really developing these recruiters to become awesome recruiters and get to the next stage in their career, and just get that feedback from candidates that I had such an amazing experience with this recruiter, giving them kudos. This is why I ended up going with this job, even though I had another offer, let's say at so and so company that's paying me 20K more, but the culture here was sold through your recruiter and of their experience and why they love the company. So to me, that's music to my ears whenever I hear that feedback, and it makes me super happy.
Yeah, that's so awesome. It's just so cool to kind of hear how, you're taking the tip of the spear element in being the first impression of your organization so seriously. And you're also encouraging your team to do the same stuff. And it's just so cool to know that we have thoughtful leaders like you and HR heroes out there who are doing the right work for the right reasons because you're looking to have a positive impact. And I think that's really awesome. I want to use our last couple seconds here to give you the opportunity to pose a question for our next guest. So what do you got?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say something that I'm very curious about when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's a huge impact to an organization. But I think the number one challenge that comes up is they don't feel like there's a sense of belonging in the organization. And I always think about this for myself, right? I'm so passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So is my team. So we could bring in diverse talent all day, every day. But if they come in and they don't feel like they belong, that's where the end we don't retain them. So that's the issue that a lot of companies do face. So my question for the next speaker would be, how do you create that sense of belonging in the workplace?
I love that. That's an amazing question. I'm really
Yeah.
looking forward to it. One of the cool things that we're going to be able to do is introduce you to that next guest via like the post production of it. And so I'm really
Awesome.
excited to introduce you to them as well. Once again, Melissa, thank you so much for being a true HR hero. I thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for so much for having me. It was an honor.
Absolutely. All right, guys, that's a wrap. Catch you in the next one. There we go. That was great.
Awesome.
You killed it.